Okay, now we are. I'm just talking. All right, we're ready to go. Cool. Welcome, everybody. Thanks for coming. It's March 4th. This is the Cluster API Azure provider meeting. We are a project under SIG Lifecycle and Cluster API. Cluster API is the main project, and we're here to talk about the Azure support for Cluster API. As we're a Kubernetes meeting, please follow the standard guidelines, which basically boils down to be nice to everyone. Try and use the Zoom feature to raise your hand so we don't stomp on each other. Please add your name down here to the attendees list, just so we have a record of who has been here. I think that's it for the boilerplate announcements. Is there anybody new or wants to introduce themselves or tell a joke or do something random? This is a good time for that. No? Okay, let's move on. Sorry.
I have something random. Your doc is not refreshing, I think.
What's not?
Because I see updates that are on the.
Did you show?
Sorry,
you see that Javier just added his name? No. I can try resharing.
Yeah, it looks like a Zoom thing.
Okay.
Oh, maybe it's just my share screen. Was it just me or?
Nope,
No.
it wasn't just you. It was
Okay.
frozen.
I just forgot to hit save in the doc. I'm sorry.
Sometimes I have to click this little button that says, what is it in English? Optimize for video clip. And I bet this will fix it. Oh my, but now I have to install some driver.
You don't want to do that.
No, yeah, I think just normal share screen works fine usually.
Okay. Is it updating or is it still messed?
Yeah, it's good.
Okay, good. Recurring topics we've already covered. For open discussion, first PSA is, and I hopefully everybody's already aware of this, but V1 Alpha 4 types have emerged now, and the dust is settling. Anything else to say about that? David, Cecile, anyone?
Nader, did you want to give a short update?
Yeah, so all the new types are merged in, and if you have an existing PR, you'd have to rebase. And if you're making any changes to your in the API folder or changing of types, please just make sure they're in the V1 Alpha 4 folder, and so move them from where you were. When you were based, it might already happen, but make sure they're in the V1 Alpha 4 types. And if you need help with something, please reach out if something is like broken or whatever. I think that's it. We haven't yet done like the actual changes of the V1 Alpha 4 to change them to like the new breaking changes that we're expecting to do, and removing of the deprecated and stuff. There's issues for these things, but we haven't done them yet. This was just pretty much moving things as is.
So there's still more work to do to actually catch up with the implementation, or are we just?
No, this was just moving the types as they were in V1 Alpha 3. So we had like a list of new things that we wanted to do that would be breaking that we were waiting for V1 Alpha 4. These ones haven't happened yet. There are like different issues for each one of them, or a bunch of issues. And there's a list of deprecated stuff that had the deprecated tag that we said we would remove when we have V1 Alpha 4, which also hasn't been removed yet.
Cool. Any questions about V1 Alpha 4 transition? I'm having trouble seeing the attendee list, so if you raise your hand, I'm probably gonna miss you. Sorry. Okay. Next up, David Justice, you want to talk about VMSS test failures?
Yeah, so we have been plagued lately with some VMSS test failures, most often cropping up in Windows, but oddly, these were actually not related to Windows. It was actually just an artifact caused by the amount of time that it took a Windows node to come up, which is slightly longer than it takes a Linux VMSS to come up. So what we found was happening is that the change made to make VMSS asynchronous, meaning that it starts a create or a patch, eventually reconciling several times possibly, and then eventually seeing that the create or the patch had succeeded or failed perhaps. This asynchronous behavior enabled the controller to start patching, and then it would come back and it would see that the bootstrap secret had changed, or in the Windows case, the admin password had mutated. Both of these were considered model changes. The model in VMSS states what the desired configuration of that node, those machine set would be, the scale set would be. So the controller saw that as a change that it had to patch onto VMSS. This caused an operation to be initiated. The reconcile would then come back and check for that operation to be ended. The operation never actually terminated because at each time, eventually we would end up running into another change to the bootstrap secret or to the admin password, causing it to repatch again, causing this to never get into a settled state, never get into succeeded. Now, occasionally it did. And so occasionally we would see this pass. This non-deterministic behavior ended up being caused by this timing issue and by the mutation of the actual model. So in 1197, what we did is we changed the way that we calculate the hash for the model. And that hash for the model is now calculated sans the admin password and the custom data blob, which is the string bootstrap data secret. So that's what's there. Hopefully this eliminates those issues, and we will probably be eliminating the hash as well to do just a actual comparison of the models in upcoming VMSS work. So anybody have any questions about this?
Hello.
Hey, Javier.
And sorry, I'm coming back again. So maybe this is a silly question, but then if you remove the password from the hash calculation, how do you change the password?
So the password is only needed on the first, on the create of Windows VMSS. After that, there is no password needed. It's not used.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and so just so cloud-based. So we're using cloud-based init on the Windows side, which is kind of a cross-platform version of cloud init, and we've configured cloud-based init to generate a password on first boot, a completely random password. So that initial password that we give Windows is just to satisfy Azure's requirements, and then the password's completely random on the Windows side. It's a 120 character random string, and the way that you get access to your Windows machine is through your SSH key.
Okay, makes sense.
I think you should have tested the PR a few more times though, David, before you merged. 22 passes.
Yeah, we really wanted to, try to be as sure as possible. These kind of issues are pernicious. They're just slight, odd little timing issues, but they crop up and they're just evil. So if anybody does see something like this occurring, please alert me or anybody else and open an issue, and we'll get some eyes on it.
Well, thanks for taking notes, Cecile. I probably could have done both, but I was lazy. Any questions about this PR and the VMSS test failures that we're hopefully clear of now? Alrighty, next discussion, right back to VMSS. Cecile.
Yeah, this is actually like very not the same VMSS, or at least it's not about VMSS. But so some of you might have run into this error before when you try to provision a or you're exposing a service on your Kubernetes cluster, and you wait for cloud provider to add the LB rules and all of that, and reconcile the load balancer, and then expose a public IP for your service. Or an internal service, same thing. You get this like not a VMSS error in the cloud provider logs, so controller manager logs. So I have been digging into this a little bit more this week. And so I just wanted to give some updates. So first of all, this error happens like it doesn't always mean the same thing when it happens. You can see that error and then it eventually succeeds. That's something that, you know, if you see that error in the logs, it probably means that it hasn't found the VMs yet because the cache hasn't refreshed. So that's one thing. The second thing is there is this error, which we've identified, and James did a really good job at like narrowing it down, and what he wrote in this issue helped me a ton. But it's basically if you have, and we've seen this happens mostly when you have one control plane. If when the controller manager boots, it gets all the virtual machines in the resource group, gets all the VMs and all the VMSS. And the issue is that if after that nodes join, since the cache hasn't expired yet, it will not know about the new VMs that join for the new nodes. And there's this logic in there that for a new node that checks when it wants to add it to the load balancer, like, is it a VM or is it a VMSS? And what it does is if it doesn't find it in the VM cache, it assumes it's a VMSS. And the issue with that is the VM cache might not always be up to date. So, and this happens for CabZ because we're using, sorry, I'm getting a bit into the weeds, but I'm happy to like go over some of the details again if I'm being very confusing. But in CabZ, what we're doing is we're kind of cheating in Cloud Provider, and we're using the VMSS VM type for all clusters. Like we're setting that by default in the Azure Cloud Provider config on the user's behalf. And the reason we're doing that is because we were advised by the cloud provider maintainers that that's the way to get clusters, to allow clusters to have both virtual machines and scale sets in the same cluster, like mixed nodes clusters essentially. And so that's what we're doing. And so that's why there's that logic that checks if it's a VM or if it's a VMSS. But it's a little hacky because it's kind of like assuming it's a VMSS unless it's not. And so I have a few attempts to fix it in that issue. It's not very pretty because essentially we don't want to refresh the cache every time, because otherwise like that means people who are actually just using VMSS are going to get cache misses every single time when we try to find the VM, and it's going to refresh the cache every single time. So the second attempt I have is just to try to only refresh the cache if the node has been, the node that we're looking for was not there last time we got the cache. Oh, David's going to expose me, or Matt is going to expose me and show my code in front of everyone. But it's not tested yet. But yeah, essentially I'm like keeping a nodes cache and like nodes names, and then trying to see like if something got added since last time. Anyways, so I will try to follow up with that. And so that's one thing. And if you're running into that error, but it seems different, as in it's not eventually succeeding after 15 minutes, then that's probably a different issue and we need to look into that. I think Nader mentioned in Slack that there was one time where he was running into that and it turned out to be there was a public IP quota issue, so it was never successful, but that's probably bad errors in the cloud provider, so we need to make that better. So yeah. Sorry, that was a lot. Does anyone have any questions, any comments on your own experience or?
I have a good question. So if we set the machine type to like standard, that would make that problem not happen for most clusters that are
Correct.
not using VMSS.
So if you set the type to standard, and it would be more straightforward because it would always assume it's VMAS. But that means you can't have machine pools and you can't add them later. So that's kind of what I was suggesting as a workaround to Sean, who was asking about this issue in Slack, was if you know you're not going to care about VMSS and you're not going to use VMSS, then maybe for now, we just unblock you by setting it to standard. What I do want to do though, is I want to work on a proposal for cloud provider to have like a like truly mixed, like hybrid modes that doesn't care what types the VMs are. It could be VMs, it could be VMSS. And then I think eventually that should be the default, because the only reason we have standard and VMSS is because basic load balancers don't support both. But if you're using a standard load balancer, which like most folks are these days, it's kind of the new default, and CABZ doesn't even support basic load balancers, then in that case, you can use both, it doesn't matter. So you shouldn't have to tell a cloud provider, like, this is what I'm using. It should just know.
So point of clarification real quick, Cecile.
Yeah.
You're saying that you would remove standard or VMSS and cloud provider would just work?
I'm saying I would only require the VM type field if you're using basic load balancers. And so if you're using basic load balancer, you have to say standard or VMSS, and you can't use mixed. It has to be one or the other. If you're using standard load balancers, then we assume you're just using both, and you can use one or the other or both. It doesn't matter. That's just a proposal idea in my head. It's not on paper yet. But
the other quick question is, you said if you have like multiple control planes, that would make this less probable to happen. Is that true?
yeah, the reason for that is that specific 15-minute delay because of the cache. It's because we think because the leader election occurs if a new control plane join and controller manager fetches the cache again. So it has a fresher cache. And in CABZ or in Cluster API, you know how if you have several control planes, the first control plane joins and then the worker nodes start joining. And so very likely your worker nodes are going to have joined the cluster before your last control plane joins the cluster.
Got it. Thanks.
It's just a timing issue. It's kind of accidental. It's not anything that we can rely on. So, yeah.
Were there any questions about load balancers and VMSS? I just want to say thanks, Cecile, for digging into cloud provider, because I know we've been because we're all busy, we've been treating it more or less as a black box, but I know you've gotten in there and refactored stuff and fixed some bugs, so it's good. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm trying to up my own knowledge. So I don't, yeah.
Cloud provider code is hard to follow. I tried to look at it. It's not easy.
Yeah, I can agree on that.
All right. So that's the end of the agenda we'd written down. Do we have any other questions or topics or randomness anybody wants to bring up? David.
All right. So when do we delete here? When do we delete EXP? Like, when do we get rid of experimental?
Why do you want to? I asked that when we were doing the V1 Alpha 4, and everybody said it wasn't ready yet.
So I don't think this, maybe some of the stuff in there is good, but more so having the other group. So we have another API group. Is that really how we want to do this? Is it annoying? Is it like going to break people in the future? Like, what do we want to do? How do we tell users this is experimental? It's in this API version, but it's still experimental in that API version. Is there a good way?
Why would we get rid of exp? Like exp the folder? Or I completely agree about the API group thing. I think we should change the API group thing. I think we shouldn't have used a different API group to start with. So the sooner we rip off that band-aid, the better. And now that we have the V1 Alpha 4 types, we should do that ASAP. But I don't think we're ready to get rid of the experimental folder. Right.
So
I think the way you tell users is you have a feature gate for those, and they're disabled by default. And they're in the experimental folder with a README that says, this is experimental. Use it at your own risk, like we have.
works.
Does that make sense? Or were you thinking of like further?
I'm just thinking about when you start adding resources or something like that, and now you're in the experimental folder. It has its own project. It has its own, like, the tooling doesn't work quite right. You know, like KubeBuilder create API. Really, you want to run KubeBuilder create API from, you know, the API or the root directory, and have it go into like Alpha v4, but again, be feature flagged.
And I want to add that when I was doing the Alpha 4, I did a Alpha 4 folder in the X types, and there was like, now there's a 3 and a 4, and it was a pain to do the conversion because they would like have issues with other conversion, and so it's not ideal.
One thing I will say kind of counter to that is I think there is also like something good about being able to develop in a completely isolated folder and not mess with like other types and other controllers and like helpers and everything. And I'm seeing that especially like with the example in CAPI with the operator right now, the CAPI operator, and folks are like developing in the experimental folder like completely separate from everyone else. And that's just making it easier for everything to move forward quickly and not break stuff and not have rebase conflicts every 5 seconds.
So I think the takeaway from that is, if you are going to generate, and you're going to generate something experimental, you can still do that. You just are going to have to move it into a different Go path, and it's going to have a different folder directory, which is totally cool. That makes a lot of sense. It's just our configs, our YAMLs are going to we're going to have to take into account and probably put it into the generation tasks to look into those folders and make sure it's generated with the proper API versions and stuff, groups and stuff. Excuse me.
Were there any changes in CAPI regarding this? Because machine pool, for example, and some other CRDs are also in X folder in CAPI.
No changes in CAPI, but CAPI also has an issue open that actually I'm assigned to, so I should get back to. That reminds me to change the API group for machine pool, because machine pool also uses the different API group, but cluster resource set, which is also in experimental, was added with the same API group as the other normal types.
And would there be some support for conversion from CRs that use the old API group to the ones that would use the new API group in that case? I mean, if this is done.
That's the open question on the table. I think we're leaning for no, but because it's experimental and it would just add a lot of complexity to like implement. Like we could do it. You have to like basically have like a controller that generates the new type, like or the new resource from the old one. But I think we haven't. Well, so what we need to do is like see if there's anyone out there who comes out and says, hey, like I need this, like I'm using it and I need this to like keep working. But what I would personally prefer is if we were able to like break it, but break it once, as in like we change the API group, but we also take it out of experimental. So it's like, okay, now we're deprecating the experimental type and you're gonna have to recreate a new one with the new non-experimental type, but now it's not experimental anymore, so you can rely on it. The problem is if we move it out of that API group into a new API group in the experimental folder, and now it's like, okay, well, you have to like go through that, but it's still not guaranteed that in the future we're not gonna break you again.
Yeah, I mean, I can give one example right now. At Transform, we are using the machine pool and Azure machine pool. So I guess if there would be no support for conversion in CAPI or CAPZ, we would probably have to do it. So yeah, I don't know, maybe we could work together on that in that case to have it in CAPI or CAPZ, you know, the support for converting old CRs to the new ones.
Yeah, sounds good. We'd have to do both probably. So David, what are your thoughts from like what the next steps are in this conversation?
Issue and let's make a plan and then open and like link it to the corresponding issue in CAPI. Yeah. Nicola, if you are able to comment on that issue, just express your concerns and just hey, sure. This will hurt. Please help us.
Yeah, I'll do that. Thank you.
Cool. Thank you.
I was muted. Is that the action item? We need to create an issue to make this visible? Or... Yeah, right on. Cool. Any other questions about EXP and API groups? Anything else we want to talk about?
Yeah, one small question. So I asked already in channel about if the CAPZ system namespace can be customized. Nadir replied, so I'll open an issue, but are there some comments from other folks maybe? So in cluster CTL init, there is a parameter to specify target namespace. So the controllers can be deployed in any namespace you specify. This is not related to experimental, just a general CAPZ question. So currently in CAPZ, I think Azure Identity is using CAPZ-system namespace. There's a constant that uses it. So are there some concerns around making it possible to specify a different namespace and having CAPZ stuff in a different namespace?
Is it already possible today to specify a different namespace with cluster kettle, like with if you take out the identity part?
I didn't try it, to be honest, but one of the colleagues tested it and stuff got deployed in a customized namespace. So he managed to create a cluster, but I'm not sure which provider did he use. So maybe since only Azure Identity is using it,
yeah,
maybe if the cluster uses default credentials, maybe it would work. I'm not sure.
Yeah, but I think it's a gap in the identity implementation if we have a hard-coded namespace that's not configurable. And I think we had seen that in the PR actually. It's just that at the time it was, I think there's like discussion around it in the PR and we ended up not fixing that or not knowing how to fix it. But I think we should look into that again.
Okay, I'll open an issue then in CabZ.
Does that make sense to you, Nader and David?
Yeah, if we can get the same, all the identity needs to just created in the same namespace as where the controller is running.
Yeah, or it might just be a fix in cluster kettle actually to, because I assume the way it's like changing, because it's when you specify a target namespace, how does it, like, I haven't looked at the code, but I assume it does something to change the namespace of the infrastructure provider resources, right? And so maybe it needs to do it to all the resources, like even the custom ones.
Yeah, okay, I'll try it out and I'll open an issue about it. Yeah, but I think that in CabZ, the hard-coded constant, which is using CabZ-system, that should probably be changed then in that case to support different namespace.
Hey, I thought I thought cluster cuddle doesn't care about what's, I guess, in the input YAML. It kind of just does the substitutions. But maybe there's only a list of resources that it does it for. But yeah, I would give this a try before even calling it, broken.
Well, the identity one for sure will need something to change about it.
Okay.
But the other one might be fine. Because that's coming from the code is a constant. Sorry.
Yeah, sorry. I have a quick question if we have a few minutes. Is anyone here who's using CabZ, building their own custom images? Either through image builder or other means? And if not, does that mean you're using the reference image?
We are building our own images in VMware and then publishing it. I think we had asked you about it before, publishing it in Azure, and then people have to accept it and then they can use it. Are you just asking to know if people are?
Yeah, I'm just curious.
Oh.
What about Giant Sword?
Yeah, we are still experimenting, so we are not still running CabZ controllers, but I believe I read somewhere that it's recommended to build our own images, so we were talking about doing that. But for now, in our tasks, we are using whatever CabZ has in the repo from Google Cloud.
Okay, I was just curious because like that's something, yeah, I'm trying to, I'm just trying to make it easy and clear for users to build their own custom images because I think right now it's a little bit confusing. And it's also not always very obvious that you should, like we're trying to make the documentation say that very clearly, but I think it's easy to not read it and just use whatever is the default. So I wanted to see if anyone had experiences around that. Okay, thanks.
Cool. Anything else we want to talk about? Guess we can call it a day. Thanks for coming, everybody. We'll see you in 2 more weeks, which is March 18th. Have a good rest of the week. You betcha.